record button, so it takes a couple seconds for it to start doing that. It's recording, Maureen.
It's recording.
Okay.
There's still a couple people waiting to get in.
So thank you everyone for attending this virtual plan amendment community meeting for NPA 2019-0013.01. If you haven't done so already, please let us know who is here in the chat box. If you could type your name and association if you're associated with one. I'm sorry, with your organization if you're associated with one. Please mute your microphone if you're joining by phone. Please turn off your video if you're participating online to save the bandwidth. This meeting, as you know, is being recorded and will be publicly posted to the speakupaustin.org/NPA website. So if you do not want your image viewed publicly, please turn off your camera. So,
Maureen, there's a couple people in the lobby.
Mark will let them in.
Okay.
So
as they pop up, Jody, I'll let them in. There's no one in right now.
Oh, it says that there are on my screen. Okay.
So as you know, this is in the Bouldin Creek neighborhood planning area. My name is Maureen Meredith. I am the plan amendment case manager. Heather Chafin is the zoning case manager, and here's our contact information. I have, excuse me. I have another slide of this information at the very end of the presentation, so I can post it at the end of the meeting if people are not able to capture it right now. So the agenda tonight, I will go over basic case information, guidelines for group discussion, how to participate in this process, why is there a plan amendment application, what is a future land use map, also called a FLUM. And then I'll do a brief presentation. The applicant's agent will do a presentation, and then we'll open the floor to questions and answers. So here's the basic case information. It is 7 lots, 909, 911, 915, 1001, and 1003 South 2nd Street, and 604 and 606 Copeland Street. It's about 0.98 acres. Again, the case number is NPA 2019-0013.01. Project name is Copeland South. The FLUM request is to change the future land use map from single family to mixed use. The associated zoning case number is C14-2021-0185. The zoning request is to change the zoning on the property from SF3NP to GRMUVCONP. The property owner applicant is SB George LLC and SB Frank South LLC. The agent is Mike Melson from Storybuilt. Guidelines for group discussion. Please feel free to type your questions into the chat at any time during this meeting. Please postpone general comments during the Q&A session. After staff and applicant presentations, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand by clicking on the hand symbol on the menu bar. Telephone participants will be able to speak during the Q&A sessions of the meeting, and Mark will call out the last 4 digits of the phone number at that time. Attendees will be muted upon arrival and through the staff and applicant presentations. Then staff will open the floor to answer questions in the chat or by attendees raising their hands to speak. Similar questions may be grouped and answered together. Please mute your microphone if you're not speaking for the sake of sound quality and clarity of conversation. If you're having connection issues, please turn off your video until called upon to ask your question. As I mentioned before, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the speakupaustin.org/NPA website. I will post it tomorrow morning. You can email or call the case managers with any questions or comments that you have. If you provide written comments, we can add them to the staff case reports. You'll get a notice in the mail of the date and time of the Planning Commission and City Council public hearings if you live within 500 feet of the property, and it will have instructions on how you can participate in these meetings. So why is there a plan amendment? Neighborhood plans are adopted by City Council as amendments to the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan. The city charter requires zoning changes to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, and most neighborhood plan amendments are amendments to the plan's future land use map. And most neighborhood plan amendment cases have an associated zoning application. This map shows the areas in blue that have city council approved neighborhood plans. That is usually consists of a plan documents that has the vision and goals written in text, and also a future land use map where the colors on the map represent the broad land uses. For example, for single family, it is represented with yellow, mixed use brown, multifamily orange, commercial in red, for example. And with those broad land uses, actually here's a zoom in map that shows that these 7 tracts have the single family land use. And this chart here shows the land uses that are considered compatible, or rather the zoning districts that are considered compatible with the broad land uses. This aerial shows the 7 tracts and where it sits on the west side of South First Street. This is a screenshot of a Google Maps that shows some of the surrounding land uses and uses in general. This future land use map again is shows the land uses. You can see mixed use to the north, to the east, to the south. To the west, there's some single family and some high density single family, which is also this zoning map shows the zoning underneath those land uses. The Imagine Austin Growth Concept Map shows the activity centers and corridors. And this map just zooms in to show the property in relation to those activity centers and corridors. You can see it is near the South First Street, which is an activity center, activity corridor, and it's just south of the South Central Waterfront Activity Center. This map shows the property in proximity to public transportation. Ends my presentation. I'll stop sharing my screen and then Mike can start his presentation. There we go.
Thanks, Maureen. I will trim up mine. Okay, can everybody see the South First Food Court?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, y'all. So this is Mike Melson, Development Manager at Storybuilt. I'm joined today by Ross Wilson, our Division President for Austin and San Antonio, as well as Mike Gaudini from Armbruster Brown. As Maureen professionally introduced the project, I won't spend much time on our request. I think it's pretty clear, but meeting with the neighborhood plan contact team regarding our request to amend the Bouldin Creek neighborhood plan, specifically changing the future land use map from single family to mixed use for these 7 lots totaling 0.98 acres on South 2nd Street and Copeland Street. So Storybuilt owns these lots as well as 3 acres adjacent to these lots. A lot of those red lots surrounding the single family lots are along South First, are owned by us and are currently designated mixed use in the neighborhood plan and GRMUV CO NP on the zoning designation. We intend to develop a mixed use project on the entire 4-acre site. There's an associated zoning case for these single family lots, as Maureen mentioned, as well as 2 other cases for the mixed use lots. All of these cases will proceed to Planning Commission at a later date with ample notice and plenty of opportunity for discussion. So today we'll focus just on this neighborhood plan amendment case, although wanted to be clear that it is part of a larger rezoning effort, and which will ultimately allow for the development of a mixed use project that we'll talk about in just a sec. I'd also like to note, let me do this, turn my camera back on, sorry for any of those who wish to watch me in action. We've spent a great deal of time working over the past year with the Bouldin Creek Neighborhood Association, including many of you here on the call, to understand and address the neighborhood's concerns and objectives with the development of this property, And we've reached an agreement in principle outlining several commitments and conditions on the part of Storybuilt for BCNA's support of our entitlement requests. So we'd like today just to share a brief overview of Storybuilt, the property, the proposed project, and the agreement with the BCNA and the benefits that the project will deliver, we believe, with your support of this neighborhood plan amendment. So the first, there we go. So for starters, for those not familiar with Storybuilt, I'll just give a quick overview with some help from Ross. But we're an Austin-based urban infill residential and now mixed-use developer. We've got 27 projects completed and underway in Austin since 2009, including 5 projects on South First. 2 of those projects are immediately adjacent to this proposed project. There are headquarters office, which is on the ground floor of Frank, which is a 63-unit condo development at 900 South First Street. And just to the west of that, a 30-unit single-family and townhome development known as Frank West. So you may be asking, Frank, where did that come from? And maybe to give you just a little bit of color into who we are as a company, as opposed to just the projects that we've done. I'd ask Ross, can you give us just a bit on sort of our naming convention and a little bit of what we've done in the community?
Sure. We have our marketing team has come up with a naming convention for our communities to use the names of rescue pets, a lot of them dogs, but we've got a parrot, a horse, a couple of cats. And the idea is to give each project a little bit of personality, and we also then partner with the rescue organization that the pet came through and make donations there on behalf of this specific project there. So I'm a longtime Bouldin Creek resident. As Mike mentioned, we've done a number of projects here on the corridor, so we have some experience on South First Street and some of the challenges that exist with the locale and context. Again, as Mike mentioned, I've been working with the neighborhood association to make sure that we address those as part of the design for this project.
Thanks, Ross. Frank is pictured at the bottom left of your screen in front of a mural depicting Frank. So we're at a lot of levels. That's at Frank Alley. For those of you who haven't had a chance to drop in, that's just on the north side of our office property there at 900 South First. And it is a project where we've brought in a number of artists that were participating in the Hope Outdoor Gallery and scheduled time for them to paint murals. So I think there's over 20 individual murals that form the Frank Alley wall back there. So just a little color on who we are. Certainly much more detail on our webpage, storybuilt.com, if you wish to peruse. So the site, Maureen did a great job of introducing where it is. If there was any doubt, it's right here along South First Street, just across from Texas School for the Deaf. There are 4 acres total in all the parcels I mentioned, and they're bisected by Copeland Street running east-west across it. Now here's a little bit of a zoom in. The area in red is the specific single-family lot parcel that we are discussing as part of this neighborhood plan amendment. And then outlined is the rest of the larger overall property. And then just to the north of both of those are Frank, you'll see, and then Frank West, just to give some context. Here are some photos from actually this morning showing what the current state of the property looks like. So this is at the far north, the top left picture is just the far north edge of the property looking west. So Frank, our condo mixed use project and headquarters, is just to your right. And then to the left, the western section of the property begins going back. It is, although 7 lots, there are 3 residential structures They're vacant except for one of the single family homes has a tenant, but the rest of the lots are vacant. And as you sort of circle through the photos, just to the top right, that's looking north down South 2nd Street, sort of at the back side of the property, which is on the right. And that's one of the residential structures, a vacant duplex. Then bottom left is just looking east from South 2nd Street back towards Texas School for the Deaf. And the last bottom right is 606 Copeland Street, one of two other single family homes there. That one is vacant. So here's a sense, just again, recapping the zoning, the current zoning on the specific lots in question and the additional lots that will form part of the project. Right, so the SF3 lots and under the neighborhood plan single family are those 7 lots in the top right quadrant outlined in red. We've got this neighborhood plan amendment case, the associated zoning case in the system. And then at the bottom right, you have noted there as parcel 5, another acre, which is zone GRMUV CONP, so mixed use. And there is a zoning case now in the system for that lot as well. And on the left side there in light blue, that parcel 2 is another almost 2 acres, also GRMUV CONP mixed use, and also zoning case. The multiple zoning cases are due to the right-of-ways which bisect those lots. But the goal is to proceed forward on all those as part of our larger proposal. And I would mention on, right, so the SF3 lots, you have the typical restrictions for that zoning type. We're going to seek to rezone those SF3 lots to the same zoning on the rest of the parcels, which is GRMUV mixed use. And those mixed use lots today have a conditional overlay on them, which limits the building height to 35 feet. And we are going to propose to increase that height to 65 feet, and the reasons why as part of this discussion. But that's just sort of current and desired zoning. You'll notice those rights of way, the Copeland Street right of way, we will do a dedication and a vacation to widen that right of way, which is the preference of the city. It's currently 40 feet. We'll take it to 50 feet and also shift it to the south so that we can wrap it or a traffic circle around a protected tree and preserve that tree. And the thin parcel number 4 in that diagram is an unused alley that we will also seek to vacate. So just a quick primer, what can we build today if we got no changes to the zoning? And this is just a sort of a basic yield study drawing, but it would be a combination of 35-foot height, probably commercial buildings on the bulk of the site, the sort of low, wide buildings all the way out to South First. And then the SF3 lots would remain back there and be developed as residential, subject to the SF3 restrictions. So this is what we could do as of right. We are here because we are seeking a better project, both for us, of course, and for the neighborhood and the community at large. So the deficiencies with this as of right plan are that it could potentially include no affordability. That has long been a stated goal of the neighborhood association to add affordable residential units to the area, to Austin, and specifically on this site. So without any zoning changes, we would likely not be able to do any affordable units. There are also monolithic structures that push all the way up to South First. There's limited green space. We'd have to remove more trees to put this design in place. There's not a great retail presence likely. There's just not the density on the site to justify a significant retail presence. There's no improvement of the pedestrian experience along South First, which those of you that know this stretch know that there's just a sidewalk right out on South First with a retaining wall against it. It's a bit harrowing. There are no public gathering spaces, and really the single family product that we could do on those SF3 lots is not going to be great. It would be backed up to commercial, sort of surrounded on all sides. Sorry, on 3 sides. There are single family lots to the east. So that's what we could do today. But we think all of us can do better. In our discussions with the neighborhood, we've focused on creating a walkable community that's porous and interconnected, not monolithic and looming over South First. We want to improve that pedestrian experience, get that sidewalk off of South First, and have an inviting pedestrian experience instead of a terrifying one. We want to activate this site with curated ground level retail programming, make it an exciting place to go. We also are going to preserve and feature the project trees, the meadows, the open spaces, and East Bouldin Creek. Our last goal is to connect to the neighborhood by creating public green spaces, inviting areas for gathering, and affordability on site. Here's just some images about what we think this could look and feel like at the retail level and the green spaces that we'd include in the project. So in order to do that, in order to have openness and green spaces and sort of meandering pathways through the site to create a great experience, we need to shrink the footprint of those buildings. And to offset the loss of area from shrinking the footprint, we need to go higher than the current 35-foot limit. So this is the site plan that we are currently working on. There are 4 main buildings to this site plan. On the far right, which is the north side of the site plan, closest to downtown, closest to our current office, would be an office building. All these buildings have retail on the ground floor, so the uses described here are above that retail ground plane. Then in the center of the project, you'd have 2 for-sale condo buildings with approximately 120 units. And then at the left of the screen to the farthest south, we'd propose a 90 to 100 room boutique hotel on that site, also with a retail presence on the ground floor. All of this would be over 2 subgrade parking garages with over 400 spaces. At the top right, you see a small building that says condo, and that would just be sort of a stacked flat or a micro unit residential building. So just to look at the proposed project plan. And again, to do this, to create these spaces and this circulation and the value necessary to provide a significant amount of affordable units, and we need to shrink the footprints and go up. Again, just a comparison versus the as-of-right plan, low, wide, occupying a significant portion of the site with single family sort of stuck back behind versus much more open area and taller buildings. This is just a view of what that retail plaza, this area just on the north parcel could look like, but open, inviting for all the neighborhood and the city to come gather, whether you're a resident or an office tenant or a hotel guest or not. So just a quick summary of the zoning process to get from where we are today to where we want to be. Again, our discussion today is just on the neighborhood plan amendment, but just so everyone understands the larger process, here is what we are proposing. So first, what we're talking about today, to change the FLUM from single family to mixed use, specifically for these 7 single family lots. We would then rezone those lots from SF3 to GR MUV CONP so that they match the zoning of the other adjacent lots and allow us to do the 65-foot project that we are pursuing, including some additional entitlement changes that we'll talk about below. So the next step would be to remove that 35-foot conditional overlay height restriction on the mixed-use properties. That would take the height limit up to 60 feet as the base zoning for the GRMUV. We would, however, agree to to step down the buildings towards South 2nd, recognizing the presence of existing single-family homes back here, 3 homes back along South 2nd. So within 30 feet of South 2nd Street, we would maintain a 35-foot height limit. Next, we do the right-of-way vacations and dedication that we discussed, widening and shifting Copeland, and acquiring this unused alley in the center of the north parcel. And then we would go to Board of Adjustments to request a 5-foot height variance to increase the max height from 60 feet to 65 feet and remove compatibility requirements triggered by the surrounding single-family properties and uses. So that's the summary of our whole process. And again, this has been, we've had over a year's worth of discussions with the Bouldin Creek Neighborhood Association. We have crafted out, we think, a excellent compromise about commitments on our end for certain desired objectives of the neighborhood association and in exchange for support for these entitlement requests. I'll go through a quick summary of these. We can certainly get into plenty of detail on this, but just to relay what we think the significant benefits are to the community, that if we are able to achieve these entitlement requests, the project will deliver. So the biggest one is that we are going to commit to up to 20% affordable units in the for sale housing that's developed. So 10% would be required by the VMU designation, 5% of that at 100% of MFI, 5% at 80% of MFI. On top of that, if we're able to achieve these entitlement changes, we would provide up to another 10% at even deeper affordability levels, 80% and 60% of MFI. So on 120 residential units, that would be a total of at least 24 new affordable for sale units. And I would note that that's sort of well above the standard today that's occurring in new development projects across Austin. But it's important to us. We understand it's important to the neighborhood. And we think with these entitlement requests approved, we can make that project work. We'll also be preserving 20 of the 29 heritage trees on site. Perhaps more if Austin Transportation doesn't require us to remove some of those trees. And we are going to put in, significant teeth to that commitment, such that there's a $100,000 penalty for any additional tree removed. And we'll have a significant bond and escrow backing up that penalty payment. All these conditions, by the way, will be reflected in a restrictive covenant that will run in perpetuity with the property. And we'll have a defense fund such that any breach, the neighborhood association will be able to make a claim. We are also committing to the protection of East Bouldin Creek. We would commit to bank stabilization of the creek, which is currently in a pretty significant erosion situation, threatening existing critical environmental features such as rim rock. We would have riparian restoration and any other additional requirements that come from the Austin Watershed Department. We will create public green spaces. We will preserve that meadow space in the back. We will add trails, signage to make sure that everyone knows that it's a public space that's available for all. And we'll make significant site plan commitments. And any changes to these commitments would require us to go back to the BCNA for approval. And that is that the residential component be no less than 50% of the total project gross square feet. We will commit to an improved pedestrian pathway, as I mentioned, along South First. We'll maintain the distance of the buildings from South First and South Second. So again, on that site plan, our goal was to push those buildings back. We will preserve the major open space areas, that plaza and the meadow. We'll have that 35-foot max height within 30 feet of South Second. We'll have a cap on the total gross square footage and on the individual specific uses with limited amounts of ability to move those around. And we'll commit to the number of buildings and the locations, right? So we can't come back and just do one big building. And we'll screen all loading areas. So that's a summary of where we are today, where we want to go. And this neighborhood plan amendment is the first step in that process. But we believe one that will ultimately deliver a great project with great benefits for the community. Thanks, Breen.
Well, thank you, Mike. This is Mark Walters. I'm a principal planner with the Housing and Planning Department, and I'll be moderating tonight's discussion. And we have a question already in the chat from Gardner Selby. Asked, will the planned pool be open at any time to neighbors? Or is it strictly for the use of the residents and hotel guests?
It will be private at this point. Yeah, it will be for property of the hotel, and it may be open to some of the residents of those units. I think that's likely to be the desire of the hotel operator.
We have a question from Bradford Peterson has raised his hand. Would you please unmute and ask your question or make your comment, please?
Sure. I am chair of the neighborhood plan contact team. I have to get that name right. A couple of questions, although I'll try not to monopolize it, so I may break them up. You may need to go back to your site plan. Actually, I'm breaking up, so I'm going to turn the video off and see if that helps. If you go back to the site plan, I may have just missed it, but the parcel that was in the corner that says that's single family parcel 1, how does that fit into your overall proposed plan?
Great question. Yeah, and I didn't touch on that piece. So we will not be rezoning that parcel. That will remain as is, and we will be part of our parkland dedication, really likely a public recreation easement, but that'll be designed to be green space managed by or open to use as a public recreation.
Okay, thanks. Question in the same sort of vicinity, just want to understand your design rationale for placing the hotel at the south end of your parcels.
Sure. Ross, you've been accompanying this design through all of its evolution for longer than I have. Do you want to?
Sure.
Speak
I'll
to
do
that.
So a few things to kind of connect there. One is pushing that aspect of the project as close to kind of the commercial center of South First Street that exists today. That really is kind of around Monroe and Elizabeth Street. And then also a little bit about the topography of the project, and that the site slopes down significantly there on the south end of the property, and allows for us to get a kind of proper loading entry there off of South First Street, which the hospitality component will require a fair amount of use of. So I think those are the two largest components of that decision as we kind of work through the design and which components landed in which buildings.
Okay, thanks. Relative to the hotel, it's a little hard for me to decide what would be the most appropriate. I think I understand why you're placing it there from what you describe. But I'm thinking relative to least impact on other properties, particularly the residential and particularly sound control more than anything else, probably. I think the greenbelt might survive the privacy issue for any of the properties on the other side of the creek and the layout of the parkland. But we have major issues within the neighborhood with outdoor sound, music primarily, traveling throughout and up and down the creek beds. So in light of that, I also wasn't sure that it was included in the BCNA discussions of whether there would be a willingness to have any time or decibel level restrictions on your outdoor space, really associated with the hotel more than anything else.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think we, has been discussed and come up and been a topic. And, I think that component of the project will follow the City of Austin required, noise ordinances and be expected to do that. Understand your point on the location of the hotel, but any other location would have actually put it closer to single family detached units, existing single family detached units owned by owner occupants. And so understand what you're saying, but that we were trying to really solve for that as part of that location.
Okay, that might be a continued issue of not so much the placement, because I get that, and in some ways there's no perfect placement relative to the neighborhood, so I don't know that one is any worse than any other alternative. But I'm not sure that I can be easily convinced that the city's sound ordinance is adequate, either in the ability to actually enforce it, which is next to nil in this neighborhood's experience, and simply the distance that sound will travel. And that's been, for my 20 years in the neighborhood, an issue from all different directions. I don't know that I would argue personally against a complete prohibition, because I think some of that is necessary for a hotel to operate, weddings, things like that. But it might be something to look at as far as our restrictions or some other additional methods to help mitigate some of the potential effects of that. I might have a few more other questions, but I'll stop so that somebody else can chime in if they're there.
So does anybody else have a question? Just either raise your hand or write it in the chat and we'll get right to it. So, okay, doesn't seem to be anyone have any questions. That's kind of amazing. So well, there we go from Jody. Would you please unmute and ask your question, please?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I noticed that both these cases were posted for hearing by Planning Commission on the 26th of July. How is that going to happen when the contact team has not been able to have a meeting and they're going to have to call one and vote, and the neighborhood hasn't actually finished the negotiations? Is that Planning Commission hearing going to be postponed?
Yeah, it can be. We have been trying to work through, Jody, as you know, the agreement. I think we're fairly close on the finalized legal document. We have been told that until that document's done, we had this meeting, that we couldn't meet with the NPCT, or there wouldn't be it wouldn't be productive to meet with the NPCT. So
no, I understand that part.
Looking
I'm just worried
for
that it's posted for action.
Sure.
Yeah, and
It's
this
only
is,
3 weeks away.
And this is
That's
Michael
fine.
Galdini, also with the applicant, and so and staff can also jump in here as well. I think there's a longstanding tradition at the city of Austin in terms of at the land use commission level that, for instance, the neighborhood will generally, if they put in a request for postponement, if the applicant puts in a request for postponement, for both parties, one for each, so that's kind of two total, is granted, generally no questions asked at the land use commission level. So postponement is an option available kind of across the board on that.
Well, I understand that part, but I mean, is staff going to postpone it because the neighborhood contact team hasn't voted, and that's part of the process here.
I'll have to talk with Heather.
Real quick, maybe Bradford can answer to this because again, we weren't able to really schedule something, so perhaps it's there's the opportunity to schedule an NPCT meeting between now and the 26th.
Yeah, this is Brad. I think that's a bit unlikely. I don't think it will be an extensive delay. It sounds like from your presentation and from my conversations with the BCNA zoning committee members that you are hopefully pretty close to a finalized agreement, and it does sound like that has been reached largely in principle. It's been reached. So it's the legalities and the technicalities. So assuming that were to continue on a relatively fast schedule, if it could, then I don't think the planning contact team would have any extensive delays. I know we have a few people on our team who were not able to make this meeting because we weren't really consulted on the scheduling of this meeting. And we have certain notification that we have to do under our bylaws and who can call the meeting and how. So I'm happy to discuss after this what we could do, how fast we could do it. I am skeptical that all those pieces could fall into place for the 26th or whatever that date is. But it's quite possible it could fall into place not too long after that. So I'm happy to try to have the contact team meet in a reasonable amount of time. I think we require in our bylaws, although I don't have them open at the moment, I think we require 10 to 14 day notice at a minimum. So I just think it's kind of tight for all those pieces, but it might not take a whole lot more than that if the work with BCNA continues. That doesn't mean, well, we'd have to call a meeting, probably have some bit of a presentation because that probably would increase your likelihood of success of getting what you're after. And then have the ability to vote, which we could do presumably at the same meeting. So we can talk about that offline, but I do want to say that I'm not sure that quite this aggressive a schedule is likely to work. But we can discuss that.
Okay. I think we you guys are working in good faith to get it done in a timely manner. We certainly will make it work from a planning commission standpoint, if we need to postpone for the 26th. So we'll I guess circle back on this issue after the meeting tonight.
Well, Brad, you also raised your hand. Do you have another question to ask of the applicant?
Yes, I do. And again, it may be helpful if you go back to your proposed site plan that you're working on. I just wanted to clarify a better understanding of exactly the plaza and the meadow that you referenced. So exactly what you're talking about. I think you've had a lot of discussions with BCNA about that, but I also don't know how much of this site plan they've seen yet. And then a clarification, those are described as sort of public amenities. And is that going to be, it sounds like that's going to be an easement, so they are still privately owned and privately maintained, but there's a public access easement. Can you talk to those couple of different things?
Yeah, this is Mike. So just on the site plan that you asked about, so we're talking about the same things. So this is the plaza. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but on the northernmost parcel, between the office and the condo building, right? We'd envision a decked, shaded area out here. There will be retail and restaurant establishments that have outdoor dining. But there will be access to this deck. It will not be reserved. And there will be a sort of a seating area. Again, we're in the concept stage here, so all of this is preliminary design discussions. It may well evolve, but the goal is to have an accessible space out in this area. And really, this space is governed by the restrictive covenant, right, where we agree to maintain the distances of these buildings from South First. The meadow is this space back here. And in this space, we would dedicate a public recreation easement here from South First, encompassing this trail that will be added to provide, clear access to this public space off South First. And we would also have commitments in the restrictive covenant. There would be sort of two spaces. One would be this public recreation easement, which would cover this trail and a portion of this area of the meadow. And then there will be an open space area governed by the restrictive covenant, which we cannot, fence off, but it needs to be maintained as open and accessible, although we would continue to own it and maintain it. And the same for the public rec easement. So we would own, maintain it, but it would be dedicated to public use and governed by Parks and Recreation.
Great, thanks. That clarifies and answers my questions.
Okay, next up is Matt Coldwell. If you would please unmute and ask your question or make your comment, please.
My first comment, I have a comment and question. My first comment is that with respect to the upcoming Planning Commission hearings that are scheduled for the end of July, the Bouldin Creek Neighborhood Association has not formally signed any covenant or any agreement. And these are serious papers that need to be signed. These are binding agreements. Our next general membership meeting, wherein we could actually get approval from the general membership, is scheduled for September. So at this point in time, it really is a bit too accelerated for the way that the Bouldin Creek Neighborhood Association works. We do not look closely. We do not have a signed agreement. So I think it is absolutely premature to be trying to talk out details until we have been able to sign an agreement, not just in principle, but that we actually have that covenant ready based upon a plethora of details. The question that I had was primarily based upon the parkland dedication and how much of the parkland is going to be dedicated versus fee in lieu of so that you're not necessarily, well, I understand there's a degree of acreage that is city requires, or you can pay a fee in lieu. So I'm curious what the ratio is with that right now. Can anyone answer me?
Hey, Matt. Sorry, this is Mike. Yeah, so the specifics around what area is going to be dedicated, we will go through the process with Parks and Recreation to determine that, but it will absolutely have to meet their standards. So I don't think we've defined exactly what the area is that's going to be the easement, the open space, and others, but we've committed in the restrictive covenant to make this publicly accessible and to preserve that open space. So the details of exactly what the square footages are of the easement, I think, will be hammered out with PARD.
Yeah, to expand on that just a little bit, I think the agreement was that we would follow or accept the PARD's request on that. And we did an early determination letter The early determination letter isn't binding because it's only good for 12 months and probably will have expired by the time we get through our site development permit. But they had in that letter asked for dedication of land versus fee in lieu. So at this time, our expectation is that the PARD will be asking for the bulk, if not all of the dedication to happen on site versus there being fee in lieu.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments they'd like to make at this time?
Yeah, I'd like to, if Matt doesn't have a follow-up question on the PARD, I'd like to circle back to his comment on the general association. In our last conversation with the GA and the vote on this property, it was my understanding, and maybe Jody can chime in here as well, that the vote was to accept the agreement and that the restrictive covenant, once negotiated and agreed upon, that the zoning committee would facilitate, only needs to go to the steering committee for approval, not back to general association for a vote. Am I misremembering or not understanding that correctly?
No, that's correct. We're not going back to the GA to present this whole thing again, no. Because the principle was approved. I mean, the nitty gritty of this agreement is not something that we would want to bring to the general association. It's way over their heads, and they haven't been involved for, 18 months or so on working on this with you guys. And that just doesn't seem like a worthwhile, way to pursue it. So what we did was we voted on it in principle. And once we have all the details worked out with the legality is when we'll bring it back to the steering committee. But nothing has changed particularly as far as what we agreed on in our draft. I mean, we agreed on the basic points are all there. It's just the nitty gritty. And that's not something for the General Association to work out at all. A lot of details.
Sure.
And not that they, shouldn't be made aware of it, but they really are not going to be able, we're not going to be able to go through that with them at this point. It's too much.
Thank you for that, Jody. Clarification. Does anybody else have any questions or comments I can make at this time? And if not, a meeting.
I do have one more question,
okay.
Mark. So there's 2 zoning cases and there's 1 neighborhood plan amendment. I also want to note that there's a site plan filed on the city's website. If somebody from Storybuilt could answer that question. I didn't understand what that was. It was an administrative site plan, and that didn't make any sense. But I'm just asking. But that's my question.
Sorry, Jody, you cut out there. I'm not sure I heard the question on.
There's an administrative site plan that Storybuilt has filed.
Oh.
On the Copeland property. So I know that there's the 2 zoning cases and the neighborhood plan amendment, which are all going as a package to Planning Commission, correct? Like they're not going to go one at a time over several meetings.
Correct.
So that's going, and that's a different area of the city, but I wanted to know what the administrative site plan was that was filed. Like, I don't understand what that was.
Yeah, Mike may have to correct me here, but I believe that's our site development permit.
Okay, it's listed as a site plan.
Yeah, and just to clarify, there are actually 3 zoning cases, right? So this one.
Oh, there are 3 zoning cases. What's the 3rd one?
Yeah, so because the right-of-way splits the property, the one runs north-south across the north parcel, and then Copeland's the other one. So if you're split off, if they're not contiguous, then it requires a different zoning submission. We were informed. So there are 2 zoning cases on the mixed-use lots. Let me go back to this map, maybe. Anyways, I can send it to you, Jody. But it's
can you send me the link to that, please? That would be great.
Sure thing. So yeah, 3 zoning cases. This neighborhood plan amendment case, and then separately we are submitting our site development permits, and there'll actually be 2 of those. but
Yeah, there
one
was
is
one
in.
for Copeland North and one for Copeland South, and I think the Copeland North one was an older one, and I just didn't understand what those were. But site development permits are different than site plans. So maybe, somebody on the staff could look into that. I know it's not your part of the deal, but if you could call development services and ask them about it, I would appreciate it.
Okay, Maureen, can you look into that on next week when you,
Yes. Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
well, if nobody else has any questions, we can end the meeting early. No one says a meeting must expand to the time allotted for it. But while we're waiting to see if anyone has any questions, Maureen, do you want to go through the next steps in this process and put up your contact information, please?
Sure. So as mentioned, the cases are tentatively scheduled for the July 26th Planning Commission hearing date. We have not made a staff recommendation yet. And we'll work with the planning contact team on the issue in getting the letter. I'll work with Heather and the applicant and the team on coordinating that. That's it.
Okay, so your contact and Heather's contact information is there. Would anyone from the applicant would like to make any closing comments before we sign off for the evening?
None here, Ross.
Mike Ross, no?
None on my end.
Good. Well, if that's the case, and I don't see anybody raising their hand or typing away desperately in the chat, we can end the meeting now and we can all get back to our days. And I'd like to thank everybody who gave us their time to participate in tonight's meeting. We really appreciate that. And again, if you have comments you want entered into the case report, you can email them to either Maureen if they're in regards to the plan amendment, or in regards to the zoning, you can email Heather. And with that, I'm going to end the recording and wish everybody a pleasant good evening.
Thank you, Mark.